because in 2000, which is unbelievable, it's been a decade. I don't know what time it is, but I wrote a book on Rosa. And CNN, just before I've done that, but CNN, which, you know, is like Fox Light, I guess, really, but that CNN called, you know, people call me nasty, but CNN called, and they called me Dr. Giovanni, which is, you know, I really like Nikki, but they called me Dr. Giovanni. So Dr. Giovanni, who do you think was the most important person in the 20th century? I said, that's easy. And it was, that's easy. I said, Rosa Parks. And they said, what about? I said, well, you called and asked me a question. I didn't call you, right? And I answered your question, right? This is not a debate. Now, now we have this discussion, which really should be had. Why did they call me? Clearly, Rosa was important. You know, I'm standing here in front of you, and you all are looking at me essentially. If Mrs. Parks were here and came into the back of that room, for reasons you could never tell, everybody would start turning around. Because you would know that the sun had come into this room. And I thought that people needed to know something about Rosa Parks because she wasn't extraordinary. And she was, but she wasn't. She didn't wake up one morning and, you know, comb her hair and say, oh, Dad, I think I started a revolution. She also did not wake up because she had a bunion and say, I'm not going to get up off the bus. None of that. And I get sick of people trying to take away what she did. Yeah, she was ready because she's a black woman who was always prepared. No matter how you look at Mrs. Parks, she was always prepared because at some point she knew she would be called upon to do something. Mamie Till, whom we don't really look at historically, though we should, was a black woman who was always prepared. She didn't know that she was going to have to give up her son as she was preparing. She didn't know what she was going to have to be asked to do. And what she was asked to do was open that casket and show the world what they did to my boy and her growth. And, of course, the death of Emmett Till is important. I wanted to write a book because I had the privilege and the pleasure of knowing Rosa Parks. One, she was funny. And it's just always nice. I've always liked little old ladies, and now I am one. But she was funny, and she was fun. And, of course, what I had learned, I lived with my grandmother most of my life. And what I learned from my grandmother and her friends, and I pass this along to you, if you sit quietly, they will forget you're there. Because at first while you were there, the old ladies will, little pictures had big ears, that kind of thing. And then after a while, they want to gossip, and they don't give a damn you sit there and not. And so they start to talk. So I would sit there with my coffee and watch her. She and Johnny would sit there and talk, and pretty soon they would forget that I was there. And so you found out just wonderful things, and I loved it. It is a privilege to know icons like that, because you know them in a different way. I do know also it's ridiculous to ask them anything, because if they wanted you to know, they would have told you. And if they didn't tell you, you're not going to know because you asked. I wanted to write a book because it was her 50th anniversary. And it seemed like if there was one thing that we weren't getting done well, was Rosa herself. So I was privileged to do this. I'm very pleased. It is a Catholic honors book. And Brian Collier, who was my illustrator, who was the illustrator, not mine, on the book, won the Coretta Scott King. And in historical respect, this is going to be the last book, because Coretta's going to die that October. This is going to be the last book that Coretta read, of the awards that carries her name. Mrs. Parks, fortunately, also got to read the book.